Say hi to the sharks, my daughter-in-law whispered as she pushed me off the yacht. My son David just stood there smiling. Their plan was to steal my $3 billion fortune. But when they returned home later that evening, I was sitting in my favorite armchair with a very special gift waiting for them. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how a perfectly reasonable Tuesday morning led to me plummeting into the Atlantic Ocean. I suppose I should have seen it coming. But at 67, I still believed that family meant something. That blood was thicker than seawater, if you will. The morning had started beautifully. David had called me personally, not through his assistant, which should have been my first red flag, inviting me for what he called a celebration cruise on his new yacht. "Mom, we want to toast your recovery from the surgery," he'd said, his voice warm with what I mistook for genuine affection. Just the three of us, like a real family. I'd been recovering from my hip replacement for 6 weeks. And honestly, I was desperate for any sign that my son and his wife Vanessa still wanted me in their lives since my husband Robert died 2 years ago, leaving me with his tech empire fortune. Things had felt different between us, colder. So I dressed carefully that morning in my navy blue dress, the one Robert always said brought out my eyes, and took a taxi to the marina. The yacht was magnificent, a gleaming white vessel that probably cost more than most people's houses. David greeted me at the dock with an embrace that felt performative, while Vanessa watched from the deck, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Isn't she beautiful?" David asked, gesturing to the boat. 42 feet of pure luxury. "We're thinking of taking her to the Caribbean next month." What he didn't mention was that they'd bought it with the money I'd given them last year to invest in David's consulting firm. $3 million that I was beginning to suspect had never seen the inside of any business account. The first hour was pleasant enough. We sailed into calm waters, the Massachusetts coastline growing smaller behind us. Vanessa served mimosas and talked about their plans to renovate the house, my old house, which I'd signed over to them after Robert died because I thought downsizing to the condo would be simpler. But then David started asking questions, casual ones at first, about my will, about the trust arrangements, about whether I'd considered making changes to simplify things for them. "It's just that probate can be so complicated, Mom," he said, refilling my champagne glass with a little too much enthusiasm. "We want to make sure everything's taken care of." That's when I noticed Vanessa filming me with her phone. Not openly, but holding it at an angle while pretending to take selfies, getting me on camera while I was drinking, while I was talking about financial matters, building some kind of evidence. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. The surgery I'd had. They'd insisted on handling all my paperwork afterward. The power of attorney documents they'd brought to the hospital, claiming it was just temporary, just to help with bills while I recovered. The way my financial advisor had stopped returning my calls. "David," I said carefully, setting down my glass. "I'd like to go back to shore now." That's when his mask slipped completely. "I'm afraid that's not going to happen, Mom." His voice was different now. Harder. "See, we need to have a conversation about your health, about your memory issues." Memory issues. I was sharper than both of them combined. "You've been showing signs of dementia," Vanessa added, stepping closer. "We have it documented. The doctors agree that you're no longer capable of managing your financial affairs." That's absurd. But even as I said it, I realized how carefully they'd orchestrated this. The boat was miles from shore. No other vessels in sight. Just the three of us, the ocean, and their plan to either convince me to sign over everything or, "Mom, we're trying to help you," David said. But his eyes were cold as winter. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." I stood up slowly, my hip still aching, but my mind crystal clear. "And if I refuse?" That's when Vanessa smiled. Really smiled. For the first time all day. "Well, elderly woman, recent surgery, probably took too many pain medications, got disoriented on the boat." She shrugged. "Tragic accidents happen all the time. I'd raised this man from diapers, taught him to ride a bike, paid for his college education, his wedding, his house, and now he was standing there nodding along while his wife threatened my life. You're both insane if you think you'll get away with this." "Actually, Mom, we've thought it through pretty carefully." David pulled out a folder of papers. "Your signature here, transferring all assets to us immediately for your own protection, and we all go home happy." I looked at the documents, at my son's expectant face, at Vanessa's phone, still recording. Then I looked at the ocean, vast and dangerous, and somehow less frightening than the two people who were supposed to love me. Go to hell, I said. That's when Vanessa moved behind me and whispered those words about sharks. The push wasn't violent. They were too smart for that. Just a sudden shove when I was off balance, looking out at the water. Over I went, navy dress and all into the cold Atlantic. As I hit the water, I heard David shouting, "Mom! Oh God, Mom!" But I also heard Vanessa's voice lower, talking to someone on the phone. "Yes, we'll need you to file the emergency petition first thing Monday morning." She's clearly not competent, too. Then the water closed over my head, and I had bigger problems than their betrayal. I'm a strong swimmer. Robert and I used to do laps together every morning, but the cold shocked my system, and my clothes were dragging me down. I kicked off my shoes and broke the surface, gasping, just in time to see the yacht speeding away. They were actually leaving me there to die. That's when I spotted the fishing boat. Captain Jake Morrison was exactly the kind of man who'd jump into shark-infested waters to save a drowning grandmother. 60-some, weathered from decades on the ocean and possessed of the kind of moral compass that seemed to be missing from my own family tree. "Holy hell, lady, what happened to you?" he asked as he and his teenage grandson hauled me aboard their fishing vessel. I was shivering uncontrollably, my teeth chattering so hard I could barely speak. Jake wrapped me in a blanket that smelled of salt and motor oil while his grandson Tyler started the engine. My family," I managed between chattering teeth. "The yacht, we saw them take off like a bat out of hell," Jake said grimly. "Didn't look back once. What kind of people leave someone floating in the middle of the ocean? The kind who inherit $3 billion if I'm not around to stop them," I thought. But out loud, I just said, "the kind who aren't really family." Jake radioed the Coast Guard while Tyler wrapped another blanket around me. "This is the Molly Sue. We've got a woman we pulled from the water about 12 miles southeast of Gloucester. She's conscious, responsive, but needs medical attention." "Wait," I said, grabbing Jake's arm. "Please don't let them know you found me." "Not yet." Jake studied my face with the sharp eyes of someone who'd seen enough of life to recognize when someone was running from more than just cold water. "You in some kind of trouble?" "Yes, but not the kind you're thinking." I took a shaky breath. "I need to get to shore without anyone knowing I survived. Can you help me?" Tyler looked at his grandfather uncertainly. "Grandpa, shouldn't we?" "Should and shouldn't are funny things," Jake said slowly. "Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't look like following the rules." He keyed the radio again. "Coast Guard, this is Molly Sue. False alarm on that rescue. Turned out to be debris in the water. All clear." As we headed toward a small private dock, Jake knew. I told them everything about David and Vanessa, about the money, about the documents they wanted me to sign. Jake listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. "So, they figured they'd rather be rich orphans than broke kids with a living mother," Jake said when I finished. "Apparently. So what are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? I was officially dead as far as David and Vanessa knew. They'd go back to shore, call the authorities, report me missing overboard, play the grieving family while they executed whatever legal documents they prepared. But here's the thing about being supposedly dead. It gives you options you never had while you were alive. "I'm going to let them think they won," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "And then I'm going to destroy them." Jake grinned for the first time since pulling me from the water. "Now that sounds like a plan worth helping with." Tyler dropped us at a tiny dock in a cove I'd never seen before. Jake knew a woman there who ran a small bed and breakfast. No questions asked. Cash only. Mrs. Chen, a tough-looking woman in her 70s who took one look at my bedraggled state and immediately started heating soup, didn't even blink when Jake explained I needed a place to stay off the books for a while. "Honey, I've been running this place for 30 years, she said, ladling chicken broth into a bowl. "I've seen people running from all kinds of things. Long as you're not bringing violence to my door, you're welcome." That evening, while David and Vanessa were presumably filing police reports about their tragically missing mother, I sat in Mrs. Chen's kitchen wearing borrowed clothes and planning their downfall. Jake had agreed to be my eyes and ears. His boat was legitimately used for fishing charters, which meant he was often around the marina where David kept the yacht. He could monitor their movements, listen to their conversations, maybe even do some investigating of his own. "Here's what I don't understand," I said, sipping my third cup of coffee. "How were they planning to make this legal? Even if I died accidentally, there are procedures, investigations." "That's what's been bothering me too," Jake agreed. "They had to have more than just forged someone on the inside." That night, I made a list of everyone who'd had access to my financial information since Robert died. My lawyer, my accountant, my financial advisor, the bank managers, the trust officers. Someone had been feeding David and Vanessa information, helping them plan this, and I was going to find out who. But first, I needed to know exactly what story they were telling about my disappearance. Mrs. Chin had an old computer with internet access, and I spent hours reading news reports about the tragic boating accident that claimed the life of prominent businessman Robert Harrison's widow. The articles painted a picture of a grieving family dealing with an elderly woman's declining mental state. David was quoted extensively talking about my confusion and memory issues in recent months. Vanessa had apparently sobbed to reporters about how worried they'd been about my safety. They'd even included a photo. Me at David's birthday party last year, looking slightly bewildered as I held a drink. I remembered that moment. I'd been confused because no one had told me it was a surprise party. And I'd arrived at what I thought was a quiet family dinner to find 20 strangers in my former home. But in the photo, I just looked lost and elderly. Exactly the image they wanted to project. The obituary was already online. Margaret Harrison, beloved mother and grandmother, passed away in a tragic boating accident while enjoying an outing with her devoted family. In Lie of Flowers, the family requests donations to the Alzheimer's Association. Even in death, they were spinning the narrative of my supposed mental decline. "Bastards," I muttered, closing the laptop. Mrs. Chin looked up from her knitting, planning something special for them. "Oh yes," I said. "Something very special indeed." The funeral was surprisingly well attended for someone who was supposedly dying of dementia. I watched from across the cemetery through binoculars Jake had borrowed from his fishing gear, hidden behind a maintenance shed that gave me a perfect view of the proceedings. David had spared no expense. Premium casket, empty of course, elaborate flower arrangements, a professional program with my photo on the front. He and Vanessa stood at the graveside in perfectly coordinated black, accepting condolences from friends, business associates, and people I barely recognized. What struck me most was how genuinely sad some of the mourners looked. My neighbor Eleanor was crying openly. My book club friends had come. Even Dr. Peterson, who'd handled my hip surgery, was there looking somber. These people genuinely cared about me, and David and Vanessa were accepting their sympathy while knowing full well I was alive. "See anything interesting?" Jake whispered, crouching beside me. "Besides my son giving an Oscar-worthy performance." "Look at who's not there," Jake adjusted his own binoculars. "Like who?" "My financial advisor, Richard Barnes. My lawyer, Patricia Walsh. My accountant, Michael Torres." I lowered the binoculars, pieces clicking into place. The people who would normally be at the funeral of a client worth $3 billion are nowhere to be seen. Maybe they're busy with the estate stuff. Maybe. Or maybe they can't look people in the eye while they're part of this scheme. After the service, I watched David and Vanessa work the crowd like politicians, shaking hands, accepting hugs, playing their roles perfectly. But I also noticed how quickly they ushered people away when anyone started asking detailed questions about my final days. That afternoon, Jake drove me back to Mrs. Chen's in his pickup truck, taking a roundabout route to avoid any chance encounters. I'd been officially dead for 4 days now, and I was starting to understand the unique advantages of my situation. "I need to get into my old house," I told him as we pulled into Mrs. Chen's driveway. "That seems dangerous." "They're probably staying there now, right?" "Not according to the property records I looked up this morning. They kept their own place. My house has been sitting empty since I moved to the condo last year." I pulled out a piece of paper where I'd been making notes. "But here's the interesting part. Someone's been paying the utilities, the electricity, water, heating. Someone's maintaining it. Why would they do that if no one's living there?" "Good question. I think it's time I found out." That night, Jake dropped me off 3 blocks from my former home in Beacon Hill. The house where I'd lived with Robert for 35 years, raised David, hosted countless dinner parties and holiday celebrations. The house I'd signed over to my son because I thought family meant something. It was after midnight, and the street was quiet except for the occasional car passing. I still had my key. David had never thought to ask for it back, and I slipped around to the back door like a criminal breaking into my own former home. The house felt different. Not empty exactly, but wrong somehow. I made my way through the familiar rooms using the flashlight Jake had given me, being careful to avoid the windows facing the street. The living room furniture was covered with sheets, but I could see that new pieces had been added. Expensive pieces. A leather sofa that cost more than most people's cars. An entertainment center that definitely wasn't there when I'd lived here. In the kitchen, the refrigerator was stocked not with the basics you'd keep in a house you occasionally visited, but with fresh food, expensive food, imported cheese, organic vegetables, the kind of premium items that suggested regular occupancy. But it was the home office, Robert's old study, where I found what I was really looking for. The desk was covered with documents, legal papers, financial statements, and most damning of all, a detailed timeline of what they called the Margaret Project. My own name turned into a code word for my elimination. I photographed everything with the disposable camera Jake had given me, my hands shaking with rage as I read through their plans. They'd been working on this for over a year, carefully documenting what they claimed were signs of my mental deterioration. Doctor visits where they'd coached me to seem confused. Social situations where they'd set me up to look disoriented. The birthday party photo in the newspaper. They'd deliberately not told me it was a surprise party, then captured my confused reaction. The medication mix-up I'd had 3 months ago that landed me in the emergency room. They'd switched my prescription bottles. Every moment of confusion, every instance where I'd seemed off balance or forgetful had been carefully orchestrated and documented as evidence of dementia. But the most chilling document was a letter from someone signed only as MT, apparently one of their co-conspirators. The timeline needs to be accelerated. Margaret's been asking too many questions about the power of attorney documents. If she gets suspicious and goes to a lawyer independently, everything falls apart. I recommend moving to Phase 3 within the next 2 weeks. Phase 3, according to the timeline, was my death. I was photographing the last document when I heard a car door slam outside. Headlights swept across the front windows, and I heard voices approaching the front door. David and Vanessa coming home from their grief performance. I quickly gathered my things and headed for the back door, but I could hear their conversation as they entered. Think the Peterson woman bought it? She was crying too hard to think straight. Besides, what's she going to investigate? Mom fell off a boat. It happens. What about the will? How long before we can probate? Opens Monday. MT says we'll have full access to the accounts within 6 weeks. I slipped out the back door and into the garden, my heart pounding. But as I crept along the side of the house toward the street, I heard something that stopped me cold. A baby crying. There was a baby in my former house. David and Vanessa had never mentioned having a child, which meant there was more to this story than I'd realized. The baby changed everything. As I crouched behind the rose bushes I planted 20 years ago, listening to the sound of an infant crying in my former home, I realized this wasn't just about my money. This was about something much bigger. Jake picked me up at the corner 15 minutes later, and I was still shaking as I climbed into his truck. You look like you've seen a ghost, he said. Worse. I've seen my replacement. I told him about the baby, about the documents, about the mysterious MT who seemed to be orchestrating everything. A baby, Jake repeated slowly. They never mentioned having a kid. Never. And David always said he and Vanessa weren't ready for children. Said they were too focused on their careers. I pulled out my disposable camera. I need to get these photos developed, but not at any place they might have connections. Jake knew a guy in Gloucester who ran a 1-hour photo shop and didn't ask questions. While we waited for the pictures, we sat in Jake's truck drinking coffee from a gas station and trying to piece together the puzzle. So they've been planning this for over a year, Jake said, studying my notes. Systematically making you look incompetent, documenting everything, getting someone inside your financial team to help them. And now there's a baby involved, which means either they've been lying about having children or I stopped. Another possibility occurring to me. Or the baby isn't theirs. What do you mean? Think about it. If they've been planning to steal my fortune, they'd want to make sure they have a legitimate heir, someone to inherit everything if something happened to them. But they'd need a child with the right bloodline, the right legal claim. Jake looked at me with concern. You think they stole a baby? I think they did something. And I think MT, whoever that is the key to understanding what. The photos were devastating when developed. Clear evidence of their year-long conspiracy, complete with timelines, fake medical reports, and financial projections showing how they planned to spend my money. But the most disturbing photo was the last one. A birth certificate I'd almost missed, tucked under other papers. Baby Harrison, born 3 weeks ago. Mother Vanessa Harrison, father David Harrison. But I'd been around Vanessa just 4 days ago on that yacht. She definitely wasn't recovering from childbirth. This birth certificate is fake. I told Jake, completely fabricated. So, whose baby is it? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in Mrs. Chen's guest room, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything I'd learned. My son and daughter-in-law had spent over a year systematically destroying my reputation, planning my murder, and forging documents to steal my fortune. And now they had a baby whose existence they were hiding from the world. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. I'm going back, I told Jake over breakfast. But not to the house. I'm going to follow them. That's dangerous as hell. Margaret, if they see you, they won't because as far as they know, I'm fish food. I spread out a local map on Mrs. Chen's kitchen table. Look, they have to take the baby somewhere during the day. Daycare, babysitter, something. Babies don't just disappear for 8 hours while their parents play grieving family. Jake studied the map doubtfully. And what are you hoping to find? The truth about that baby and hopefully the identity of MT, Mrs. Chen, who'd been quietly listening while washing dishes, finally spoke up. There's a private investigator in town who owes me a favor. Professional, discreet, and very good at following people without being seen. I can't involve anyone else in this, I protested. Honey, Mrs. Chen said, drying her hands on a dish towel. You're way past being able to handle this alone. These people tried to kill you. They're not going to hesitate to try again if they figure out you're alive. She was right, of course. But hiring a private investigator would require admitting to more people that I wasn't actually dead. It meant expanding the circle of people who knew my secret. What kind of favor does this investigator owe you? Mrs. Chen smiled mysteriously. The kind where my grandson didn't go to jail for something stupid he did when he was 22. PI named Danny Crawford, former cop, very reliable and excellent at making problems disappear. By noon, I was sitting in Danny Crawford's small office above a sandwich shop in downtown Gloucester, telling my story for the 3rd time in a week. Danny was about 50 with prematurely gray hair and the kind of alert eyes that missed nothing. So, you want me to follow your son and daughter-in-law, find out about this mysterious baby, and identify their co-conspirator? He summarized after I finished. That's right. And you're paying me with what? Because according to the newspapers, all your assets are frozen pending probate. I pulled out an envelope I'd prepared earlier. Cash. I had some emergency money hidden in a safety deposit box that David doesn't know about. Robert always insisted we keep liquid funds available for emergencies. Danny flipped through the bills, enough to cover 2 weeks of surveillance, and nodded. I'll need photos of the targets and any addresses where they might be staying. I gave him everything I had, including the photos from my break-in at the house. Danny studied them carefully, paying particular attention to the documents with a mysterious MT signature. This handwriting looks familiar, he said, pulling out a magnifying glass. Professional, but with some distinctive characteristics. Mind if I run this through some databases? Do whatever you need to do. One more thing, Danny said as I prepared to leave. If these people are as dangerous as you say, we need a safety protocol. You check in with me every 12 hours. If I don't hear from you, I take everything to the police. I agreed, though I hoped it wouldn't come to that. The less official involvement, the better. At least until I understood exactly what David and Vanessa had done. That afternoon, I went back to Mrs. Chen and waited and planned because now I had help. Real help, professional help, and in less than 24 hours, I was going to know exactly who had tried to kill me and why. Danny Crawford was worth every penny I'd paid him. By the end of the second day, he had more information about David and Vanessa's activities than I'd learned in months of living with them. Your son's been very busy since you allegedly died, Danny said, spreading photographs across Mrs. Chen's kitchen table. Multiple meetings with lawyers, 2 visits to the bank, and 3 separate trips to a private medical facility outside Boston. Medical facility, Whitmore Reproductive Services. Very exclusive, very expensive, and very discreet. Danny pointed to a photo of David and Vanessa entering a modern glass building. They specialize in surrogacy arrangements for wealthy clients who want to maintain privacy. The pieces were clicking into place, and the picture they formed made my stomach turn. They bought a baby. Looks like it. And not just any baby. They specifically requested a newborn that could pass for their biological child. According to my contact at Whitmore, the arrangements were made 8 months ago, paid for in cash with instructions to have the birth certificate pre-prepared. Mrs. Chen sat down 3 cups of coffee and joined us at the table. So they planned your death, bought a baby to inherit your fortune, and had someone inside your financial team helping them. About that, Danny said, pulling out another photo. I think I found MT. The photo showed a woman in her 40s with short auburn hair and an expensive briefcase shaking hands with David outside a downtown law office. She looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place her. Miranda Torres, Danny continued, partner at Morrison Torres and Associates. They handle estate planning for several prominent Boston families. Torres, I repeated, wait, Michael Torres is my accountant. Are they related? Married? And here's where it gets interesting. Miranda Torres has been quietly building a client base of wealthy elderly individuals with strained family relationships. She specializes in what she calls family transition planning. I stared at the photo, recognition finally dawning. I met her about 6 months ago at some charity function David dragged me to. She was very interested in my estate planning. Kept asking questions about my trust structures. I'll bet she was because Miranda Torres has a very specific business model. She identifies elderly clients with substantial assets and estranged families, then helps the families accelerate their inheritance through what she calls compassionate intervention. You mean murder, Mrs. Chen said bluntly. I mean she creates legal frameworks that allow families to take control of assets while the elderly person is still alive using claims of incompetence, dementia, or diminished capacity. She's done it at least 6 times in the past 3 years. Danny spread out more photos, surveillance shots of Miranda Torres meeting with different families, entering various law offices, visiting what appeared to be private medical facilities. She's running a whole operation, finds wealthy elderly people with greedy relatives, helps orchestrate evidence of mental decline, provides legal cover for asset transfers, and takes a substantial cut of the inheritance. And if the elderly person refuses to cooperate or gets suspicious, they have accidents, boating mishaps, falls downstairs, medication overdoses. Always tragic, always plausibly accidental, and always financially convenient for the surviving family. I felt sick. This wasn't just about my money. It was about a systematic operation targeting vulnerable seniors. How many people has she killed that I can prove? None. That I suspect at least 12 over the past 5 years. She's very good at covering her tracks, and she only works with families who can provide plausible alternative explanations for their relatives' deaths. We have to stop her. We will. But first, we need to understand exactly what your son and daughter-in-law have already put in motion. Because according to my sources, they filed preliminary probate documents yesterday. Danny pulled out a legal folder. They're claiming you died intestate without a valid will, which would make them your sole heirs. They're also claiming that any existing estate planning documents are invalid because they were signed while you were mentally incompetent. But I have a will, a very specific, detailed will that was updated just 2 years ago. I know. I found it. Danny opened the folder and pulled out a familiar document. My will with what appeared to be my signature at the bottom. But the text was completely different from what I remembered signing. They replaced it, I whispered, scanning the forged document. This leaves everything to David with provisions for any future children he might have, including the baby they just acquired through Whitmore Reproductive Services. I stood up and walked to Mrs. Chen's window, looking out at the ocean. A week ago, I'd been a grieving widow trying to maintain a relationship with my only family. Now I was a murder victim who'd survived her own assassination, discovering that my son was part of a larger criminal enterprise targeting elderly people. There's something else, Danny said gently. About the baby. I turned back to face him. The birth mother was a 17-year-old girl named Sarah Collins. Run away from Maine. No family, no support system. Miranda Torres found her at a shelter in Portland and offered her $50,000 to carry a baby for a loving couple who couldn't have children. Where is she now? Danny's expression was grim. According to the medical records, she died from complications during delivery. But I spoke to a nurse at Whitmore who remembers Sarah. Healthy girl, no risk factors, normal pregnancy right up until the day she gave birth. The implication hung in the air like smoke. They killed her, I said. I think so, but I can't prove it yet. Danny gathered up his photos. What I can prove is that your son and daughter-in-law are part of a criminal organization that's been systematically murdering elderly people for their money. And tomorrow morning, they're meeting with Miranda Torres to finalize the legal transfer of your assets. I sat back down, my mind racing. Where? Torres's office downtown. 10 a.m. I looked at Mrs. Chin. Then at Danny. Then at the photos spread across the table showing my son shaking hands with a professional killer. Then I guess it's time for Margaret Harrison to rise from the dead. The hardest part about planning your return from the dead is deciding which audience gets the shock first. I could confront David and Vanessa privately, giving them a chance to explain themselves, but that assumed they deserved an explanation. Or I could make my resurrection public, letting them discover I was alive the same way the rest of the world would. I chose option 3, strategic haunting. You want to what? Danny asked when I explained my plan. I want them to know I'm alive but not know how much I know about their operation. I want them scared, off balance, making mistakes. Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. Psychological warfare. I like it. The plan was simple but effective. While David, Vanessa, and Miranda Torres were in their downtown meeting dividing up my assets, I would be making my presence known in more subtle ways. Danny had discovered that they were keeping the baby at David's house during the day with a private nurse who'd been hired through one of Miranda Torres's front companies. The nurse, a woman named Carol Peterson, had no idea she was caring for a baby that had been essentially purchased through the death of its teenage mother. Carol's a good person, Danny assured me after running a background check. Single mom, nursing degree, clean record. She probably thinks she's helping a legitimate family with childcare. Then she deserves to know the truth. That morning, while David and Vanessa were downtown legally erasing me from existence, I stood on the front porch of my former home and rang the doorbell. Carol Peterson was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with tired eyes and genuine warmth. She opened the door holding a baby bottle and wearing scrubs covered with cartoon animals. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Hello, Carol. My name is Margaret Harrison. I believe you're caring for my grandson." The blood drained from her face. She knew that name. It had been all over the news for the past week. The wealthy widow who died in a boating accident. "Are you dead?" "Yes, I've been reading about that." "I've been reading." Fascinating story, though not entirely accurate. I smiled gently. "May I come in? I think we need to talk." Carol stepped back, still staring at me like I was actually a ghost. "But you died in the papers on the news." "Your son said." My son said a lot of things, apparently, not all of them true. I followed her into the living room, my former living room, where a baby sat in a bouncy seat, gurgling contentedly. "Oh," I breathed, seeing the infant for the first time. "Oh, you beautiful thing." The baby was perfect, maybe 3 weeks old, with dark hair and serious brown eyes. He was wearing an expensive outfit, and the room around him was filled with high-end baby equipment that must have cost thousands of dollars. "What's his name?" I asked, settling into a chair beside the bouncy seat. "Baby Harrison," Carol said automatically, then caught herself. "I mean, they said his name was going to be Robert Jr. after his grandfather, but they haven't decided for sure." "They haven't decided because they don't know him well enough to name him," I said softly. "Because he's not really their baby, is he?" Carol sat down heavily on the sofa. "I don't understand what's happening. You're supposed to be dead. And David and Vanessa, they're supposed to be grieving parents who needed help with their newborn while they dealt with family matters. Carol, I need you to listen very carefully. This baby is not David and Vanessa's biological child. They purchased him through an illegal surrogacy arrangement that resulted in the death of his birth mother, and they attempted to murder me 6 days ago so they could steal my inheritance and raise this child as their heir. That's impossible. I pulled out the photos Danny had taken, the documents I'd copied from David's home office, the evidence of Miranda Torres's criminal operation. I showed Carol everything, watching her expression shift from disbelief to horror as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. The teenage girl who gave birth to this baby was named Sarah Collins, I said gently. She was 17 years old with no family, no support system. They told her she was helping a loving couple who couldn't have children. She died during delivery under suspicious circumstances. Carol was crying now, looking at the baby with new understanding. He's an orphan. Yes. And if David and Vanessa get away with this, he'll grow up thinking they're his parents, never knowing his real mother died to give him life. What do you want me to do? I want you to take pictures. Document everything you can about how they treat him, what they've told you, who else has been involved, and then I want you to help me make sure this baby grows up knowing the truth about where he came from. Carol wiped her eyes and nodded. His real name should be Robert Sarah Harrison, after his grandfather and his birth mother. That's perfect. I spent an hour with Carol and baby Robert Sarah, taking photos, documenting the setup in my former home, and explaining what would happen next. Carol agreed to continue caring for the baby while secretly gathering evidence and keeping me informed about David and Vanessa's activities. They'll be back around noon, she told me as I prepared to leave. They always come home for lunch to check on him, make phone calls, handle business. Perfect. By then, they'll have received my first message. While I'd been talking to Carol, Danny had been busy downtown. He'd parked across from Miranda Torres's office building with a telephoto lens, taking pictures of David and Vanessa, entering the building, meeting with Torres, shaking hands over what they thought was my legal death certificate. But the real gift was what Jake had delivered to their lawyer's office while they were in the meeting. I'd written a simple note on elegant stationery. Dear David and Vanessa, reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. We need to talk. Love, Mom. P.S. Give my regards to little Robert Sarah. He's beautiful. The note was delivered by messenger at exactly 11:47 a.m. While they were still in Torres's office finalizing the probate paperwork, according to Danny, who watched from across the street, all three of them came running out of the building within minutes of receiving the note, their faces white with panic. The psychological warfare had begun. And that afternoon, when they returned to my former house, expecting to find their comfortable conspiracy intact, they were going to discover that their supposedly dead victim had been very busy indeed. Because I wasn't just alive, I was angry. I was armed with evidence, and I was ready for war. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one Robert had bought me for our 20th anniversary when David and Vanessa came home from their meeting with Miranda Torres. I'd positioned myself so I'd be the first thing they saw when they walked through the front door of what used to be my house. The look on their faces was worth 6 days in the Atlantic Ocean. Hello, darlings, I said pleasantly, not getting up. How was your meeting? I hope you didn't sign anything important while I was away. Vanessa screamed. Actually, screamed like she'd seen her worst nightmare come to life, which I suppose she had. David just stood there with his mouth open, still holding his keys, staring at me like I might disappear if he blinked hard enough. Surprised? I asked. I have to say the reports of my death were terribly premature, though I did enjoy reading my own obituary. Alzheimer's donations? Really? That was a nice touch. Carol appeared from the kitchen carrying baby Robert Sarah. She'd been waiting in the back of the house as we'd planned, ready to witness whatever happened next. Mrs. Harrison asked me to bring the baby out, Carol said nervously. She wanted to meet her grandson properly. Her grandson? Vanessa found her voice, though it came out as a croak. Carol, this woman she's dead, I supplied helpfully. Yes, we covered that. Turns out drowning is harder than it looks, especially when there are good people around to pull you out of the water. David finally managed to speak. Mom, we thought the Coast Guard searched. The Coast Guard searched for debris, not survivors. Funny how that works when no one actually reports a person overboard. I accepted the baby from Carol, settling him comfortably in my arms. Hello, little Robert Sarah. I'm your real grandmother, not the kind who tries to buy you with blood money. His name isn't Robert, Sarah. Vanessa snapped, some of her composure returning. His name is whatever we decide to name him because he's our son. Is he? I looked down at the baby who was looking back at me with those serious brown eyes. Tell me, Vanessa, when exactly did you give birth? Because 4 days ago on that yacht, you certainly didn't look like someone who delivered a baby 3 weeks earlier. I weep. The birth was private. Yes, I'm sure it was very private indeed. So private that the actual mother died during delivery under mysterious circumstances. I looked up at them both. Did you know her name was Sarah Collins? 17 years old from Maine. No family to ask questions when she disappeared. The silence in the room was deafening. Carol gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. That's impossible, David said. But his voice lacked conviction. We would never what? Never conspire with Miranda Torres to run an illegal surrogacy operation. Never systematically poison an elderly woman's reputation to steal her fortune. Never push your own mother off a yacht and leave her for dead. I stood up slowly, still holding the baby. Which part exactly would you never do, David? Vanessa recovered first, her shock transforming into the cold calculation I'd seen on the yacht. Prove it. You can make all the accusations you want, but proving any of it is another matter entirely. Oh, darling, I said, smiling for the first time since they'd walked in. You really shouldn't have said that. Carol, would you mind taking Robert Sarah to his room for his nap? I asked, not taking my eyes off David and Vanessa. The grown-ups need to have a conversation. After Carol left with the baby, I walked over to the mantelpiece where David had displayed several family photos, none of which included me. I noticed. Sit down, I said, my voice carrying the authority that had once run Robert's household staff. Both of you, they sat, still looking shell-shocked. Let me tell you what I've been doing for the past week while you've been planning my funeral and dividing up my assets. I pulled out a manila folder from behind the chair cushion. I've been investigating and learning and documenting. I spread the photographs Danny had taken across the coffee table. David and Vanessa meeting with Miranda Torres. Multiple visits to Whitmore Reproductive Services. Financial documents showing the cash payments for the baby. This is Miranda Torres, I said, pointing to one photo. She specializes in helping families like you accelerate their inheritances through what she calls compassionate intervention. In plain English, she helps greedy relatives murder elderly people for their money. That's ridiculous, Vanessa said. But she was staring at the photos with growing alarm. Is it because I have documentation of at least 6 other cases where Miranda Torres provided legal cover for families who wanted their elderly relatives dead? 6 other families who suddenly had convenient accidents after showing signs of mental decline that were later proven to be artificially induced. I pulled out another set of documents. Like Mrs. Ella Laner Walsh, age 73, fell down the stairs in her own home 3 weeks after her son started adding sedatives to her evening tea. Her son inherited $2 million. David had gone very pale. Mom, you're scaring yourself with conspiracy theories. Or Mr. Charles Bennett, age 68, died in a single car accident after his daughter convinced his doctor that his medication needed to be adjusted. His daughter inherited $4 million. I looked directly at David. These aren't theories, son. These are murders, and you're part of the same operation. We never killed anyone, Vanessa said quickly. Even if what you're saying about this Torres woman is true, we never actually hurt anyone. Really? What about Sarah Collins? Silence. What about the 17-year-old girl whose baby you bought? The girl who died during delivery under suspicious circumstances? The girl whose death gave you the heir you needed to justify inheriting my fortune. That wasn't we didn't know. David started, then stopped. Didn't know what that Miranda Torres was running a black market baby operation using vulnerable teenage girls. Didn't know that those girls had a habit of dying during delivery? Didn't know that you were accessories to murder? I pulled out another document, Sarah's death certificate, which Danny had obtained through his contacts. Sarah Collins died from what the medical examiner called unexpected cardiac arrest during delivery. But according to the nurse who was present, Sarah was healthy, young, and showing no signs of distress right up until the moment she stopped breathing. Carol had returned and was standing in the doorway listening to everything. The same nurse, I continued, who told my investigator that Miranda Torres was present during the delivery and that she personally administered what she claimed was a routine medication just minutes before Sarah went into cardiac arrest. Your investigator? David asked weakly. Oh yes. Did you think I was handling this alone? I have a private investigator, surveillance photos, financial records, medical documents, and testimony from multiple sources. I smiled coldly. I also have something else you might find interesting. I walked over to what used to be Robert's desk and opened the top drawer, pulling out a small digital recorder. I've been recording this entire conversation. Every word you've said, every admission you've made, every piece of evidence you've confirmed. I held up the recorder. Did you know that in Massachusetts, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation? And since this is taking place in what used to be my home, I think I qualify as a consenting party. Vanessa jumped to her feet. You can't use that in court. It's entrapment or something. Actually, it's evidence. Evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to murder. Evidence that will put both of you in prison for a very long time. David finally found his voice. What do you want? What do I want? I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. I want my money back. I want that baby properly adopted by a family who will love him and tell him the truth about his birth mother. I want Miranda Torres arrested for the serial killer she is. And I want you both to spend the rest of your lives remembering that you tried to murder your own mother for money. And if we cooperate, Vanessa asked, if you cooperate, I might consider not pressing charges for attempted murder. The fraud charges, the conspiracy charges, the accessory to murder charges, those are out of my hands now. But attempted murder is my choice. I looked at both of them. These two people who had shared my home, my table, my family holidays, who had planned my death with the same casual efficiency they might use to plan a vacation. You have 24 hours to decide. They chose poorly. Instead of confessing, instead of cooperating, instead of showing even a hint of remorse for trying to murder me, David and Vanessa decided to double down on their original plan. I discovered this at 6 o'clock the next morning when Danny Crawford called Mrs. Chen's bed and breakfast with an urgent warning. They're moving fast, he said without preamble. I've been monitoring their communications, and they spent all night on the phone with Miranda Torres and someone else. Someone they kept referring to as the cleaner. I was instantly awake. What kind of cleaner? The kind who makes problems disappear permanently. They're planning to have you killed again, and this time they want to make sure the body is found, so there's no question about your death. Mrs. Chen, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway, immediately started making phone calls. Within 15 minutes, Jake Morrison was at our front door with his pickup truck, and we were evacuating to a safe house Danny had arranged. How much time do we have? I asked as we drove through the pre-dawn darkness. Not much. The cleaner they hired is flying in from New York this morning. According to my sources, he specializes in making murders look like accidents, and he's got a perfect success rate. The safe house was a small cottage on a private island accessible only by boat. Jake knew the owner, another fisherman, who owed him favors and didn't ask questions. We reached it just as the sun was coming up over the Atlantic. This is insane, I said, sitting at the cottage's kitchen table with a cup of coffee, trying to process what was happening. My own son hired a professional killer to murder me. People do terrible things for money, Jake said grimly. But we're not going to let them get away with it. Danny arrived an hour later with more disturbing news. It's worse than we thought. Miranda Torres isn't just running a murder for inheritance scheme. She's part of a larger network. They've been targeting wealthy elderly people across New England for years. He spread out photographs and documents across the table. I've identified at least 20 suspicious deaths over the past 5 years. All wealthy seniors, all with greedy relatives, all ruled accidental or natural despite circumstances that should have triggered investigations. How are they getting away with it? They've got people inside the system. Medical examiners, police detectives, probate judges. It's not just a family business. It's organized crime with a very specific target demographic. Mrs. Chen, who had insisted on coming with us despite the danger, was studying the photographs with a keen eye. This woman here, she said, pointing to a surveillance photo. I've seen her before. Where? At the hospital where I volunteer. She was there about 6 months ago asking questions about elderly patients who didn't have family visitors. Said she was from some kind of social services agency. Danny and I exchanged looks. She was scouting for targets. And now they're coming after you because you're the first person who survived their operation and can testify about what they do. Jake said, then we need to make sure my testimony is heard before they have a chance to silence me. I spent the rest of that morning writing everything down. Every detail of David and Vanessa's betrayal, every piece of evidence we'd gathered about Miranda Torres's operation, every name and date and transaction I could remember. If something happened to me, at least the truth would survive. But around noon, Don's phone rang with news that changed everything. They found the cleaner, he said after ending the call. Dead in his hotel room. Single gunshot to the head. Professional execution. What does that mean? It means Miranda Torres is cleaning house. Anyone who can connect her to the murder network is being eliminated, including potentially your son and daughter-in-law. The thought of David being murdered should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a cold satisfaction that surprised me with its intensity. Good, I said. Let them find out what it feels like to be betrayed by someone they trusted. But Jake was shaking his head. You don't understand, Margaret. If Torres is eliminating witnesses, that includes you, but it also includes that baby. An orphaned infant with no legal guardians is a loose end she can't afford. My blood ran cold. Robert Sarah. She'll have him killed, too. Make it look like a tragic accident. Carbon monoxide leak, house fire, something that eliminates the evidence along with the witness. I stood up so fast I knocked over my coffee cup. We have to get him. It's too dangerous. They'll be watching your old house, waiting for you to show up. Then I guess I'll have to give them what they're waiting for. The plan was simple, which made it terrifying. I would surrender myself to David and Vanessa, let them think they'd won, and trust that Danny and Jake would be in position to rescue both me and baby Robert Sarah when Miranda Torres showed up to clean house. This is the stupidest plan I've ever heard, Mrs. Chin said as we prepared to return to the mainland. It's the only way to save that baby, I replied, checking the hidden recording devices Danny had given me and to get enough evidence to bring down Torres's entire operation. Danny had been monitoring communications all morning. Miranda Torres was driving up from New York, planning to arrive at my former house by evening. David and Vanessa had been told to have me there alive so Torres could question me about what I knew before arranging my final accident. They think I'm going to trade my life for the babies, I told Jake as his boat approached the dock in Gloucester. They have no idea I've been planning this for days. The recording devices were hidden throughout my former house, planted by Carol Peterson, while David and Vanessa were out making their arrangements with Torres. Carol had also positioned cameras in strategic locations and would be hiding in the basement with baby Robert Sarah, ready to escape through the old servants' entrance if things went wrong. You sure about this? Jake asked as we reached the dock. I'm sure that if I don't do this, an innocent baby will die because of my son's greed. That's not something I can live with. I walked up to my former front door at exactly 6 o'clock. As arranged, David answered, looking haggard and frightened. Mom, he said, and for just a moment I heard my little boy in his voice, the child I'd raised, loved, sacrificed for. Hello, David. I'm here as promised. Vanessa was pacing in the living room, her usual composure completely shattered. She'll be here soon, she said without looking at me. Miranda Torres. She wants to talk to you. I'm sure she does. Mom, David started, then stopped. I never wanted it to go this far. But you let it, I said simply. You let it go this far because $3 billion was worth more to you than your mother's life. He couldn't meet my eyes. Miranda Torres arrived precisely at 7 o'clock. She was smaller than I'd expected, a neat, professional-looking woman who could have been anyone's accountant or lawyer, which I supposed she was. Mrs. Harrison, she said pleasantly, extending her hand as if we were meeting at a cocktail party. I'm so glad you survived your boating accident. We have a great deal to discuss. I'm sure we do. She sat across from me in what used to be my own living room, opened a leather portfolio, and began speaking as if we were negotiating a business contract. You've caused quite a bit of trouble for my clients, she said. David and Vanessa followed my instructions precisely, And yet here you are, very much alive and apparently well-informed about matters that don't concern you. Murder concerns me, especially when it's my own. I prefer to think of what we do as estate planning acceleration, helping families access inheritances that would otherwise be tied up for years in lengthy probate proceedings. She smiled coldly. We provide a valuable service to people who understand that time is money and the elderly people you kill. What service do you provide to them? Peace, an end to the confusion and fear that comes with age-related cognitive decline. A dignified death that allows their families to remember them as they were, not as they become. I stared at her, amazed by her ability to rationalize mass murder. How many? How many what? How many people have you killed? She consulted her portfolio as if checking appointment schedules. Over the past 5 years, my clients and I have successfully resolved 37 cases involving elderly individuals whose continued existence was creating financial and emotional hardship for their families. 37 murders. She was confessing to 37 murders as if they were tax returns she'd filed. And you're planning to make me number 38? Oh, Mrs. Harrison, I'm afraid you'll be number 39. We had to resolve another matter earlier today. A gentleman who was becoming too curious about our operations. She smiled. But yes, you will unfortunately need to have another accident, a more permanent one this time. And the baby, tragic carbon monoxide leak. These old houses, faulty heating systems can be so dangerous. I looked at David and Vanessa, who were sitting frozen on the sofa like mannequins. This is what you wanted. Not just my death, but the death of an innocent baby? Neither of them answered. The baby is a loose end, Torres continued matter-of-factly. His existence complicates the inheritance structure, and his origins raise too many questions. Much simpler to eliminate him now and claim that David and Vanessa are tragically childless and in need of the emotional support that only significant wealth can provide. That's when I smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. Miss Torres, I said pleasantly, I think there's something you should know. And what's that? You're under arrest. The FBI agents came through every door simultaneously, front, back, basement, and even through the windows. They'd been listening to every word Miranda Torres had said, recording her confession to 37 murders, and her plans to commit 2 more. Miranda Torres, Agent Sarah Chan announced, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, elder abuse, and racketeering. Torres tried to run. She actually bolted for the kitchen, probably hoping to escape through the back door. She made it about 6 feet before 3 agents tackled her to my former hardwood floors. David and Vanessa just sat there in shock as Agent Chin read them their rights. Margaret Harrison, Agent Chin said, turning to me with a smile. That was extremely dangerous and extremely well done. It turned out that Danny Crawford wasn't just a private investigator. He was a former FBI agent who'd been working undercover to investigate the elder abuse network that Miranda Torres had been running. My case had provided the perfect opportunity to get Torres to confess on tape to her entire operation. We've been tracking her for 2 years, Agent Chin explained as the house filled with crime scene technicians. But she was too careful, too smart. She never directly participated in the murders. She always used intermediaries and made sure she had plausible deniability. Until today, I said, until today, when she confessed to 37 murders while planning 2 more on federal recording equipment. Carol Peterson came up from the basement carrying baby Robert Sarah, both of them unharmed. Is it over? She asked. It's over, I confirmed, taking the baby from her arms. At least the dangerous part is over. The legal part took months. David and Vanessa were charged with conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, elder abuse, and accessory to murder in the death of Sarah Collins. They both took plea deals, 25 years for David, 20 for Vanessa. Miranda Torres went to trial and was convicted on all counts. Life in prison without possibility of parole. The network she'd built was dismantled over the following year. 17 other conspirators were arrested, including corrupt medical examiners, probate lawyers, and family members who'd participated in the murders. The investigation revealed that the operation had stolen over $200 million from elderly victims across 6 states. But the most important outcome was baby Robert Sarah. I legally adopted him with the full support of the court system and Sarah Collins's extended family who were found living in Canada. They were grateful that someone was willing to raise Sarah's son and tell him the truth about his brave young mother who had tried to give him a better life. His real name is Robert Sarah Harrison, I explained to the family court judge. Robert for his grandfather, Sarah for his birth other, and Harrison because that's the family that will love him and raise him with the truth about where he came from. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd been following the case closely, smiled. I think Sarah Collins would be proud of how her story ended. I'm 72 now, 5 years later, and Robert Sarah is a remarkable little boy who knows exactly who he is and where he came from. He knows his birth other was a brave teenager named Sarah who wanted him to have a good life. He knows his adoptive father and stepmother tried to use him in a scheme that cost Sarah her life. And he knows that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones you have to protect yourself from. Mrs. Chen still runs her bed and breakfast, though she's added a sideline as a consultant, helping other elderly people who suspect their families might not have their best interests at heart. Jake Morrison still runs his fishing charters, but he's also become something of a local legend for pulling dying grandmothers out of the Atlantic Ocean. And Danny Crawford, Agent Crawford, still works for the FBI, but he sends me Christmas cards every year with photos of other elderly people whose lives he saved. As for David and Vanessa, they're still in prison. David writes me letters sometimes trying to explain why he did what he did, asking for forgiveness, claiming he was manipulated by people smarter than him. I don't write back. Because here's what I learned during my week as a dead woman. Family isn't about blood or obligation or inheritance. It's about showing up when someone needs you, protecting the vulnerable, and choosing love over greed every single day. Robert, Sarah, and I have that kind of family now. The kind where no one gets pushed off boats, no one steals trust funds, and no one has to die for someone else to get rich. It's a much better family than the one I was born into, and definitely better than the one I raised. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.